The emeralds were hers by right, or at least by the logic Queen Mary applied to such things. When her brother, Prince Francis of Teck, died, the Cambridge emeralds, stones that had passed through her maternal family for decades, didn't come to her. They went to his mistress, to Nellie, the Countess of Kilmorey, who had no claim to anything with the name Cambridge attached to it. Queen Mary didn't shout. She negotiated. She paid £10,000 to buy back what she considered family property, and then she had the stones worked into pieces she could place properly, into the custody of women she had chosen. That transaction, confirmed in the record, explains more about Queen Mary than almost anything else documented about her. Objects had correct homes. Displacement was a form of disorder. Disorder she would spend her life correcting. Victoria, Mary, Augusta, Louise, Olga, Pauline, Claudine, Agnes of Teck was born on May 26, 1867, into an aristocratic family whose title considerably outran its finances. Her father, Francis, Duke of Teck, spent substantially beyond the family's means. They lived abroad in extended periods to escape their creditors. She grew up understanding, from the earliest age, that social position without material substance wasn't secure at all. Objects weren't luxuries to her. They were evidence, proof that things were as they should be. By the time she became Queen Consort in May 1910, after George V ascended to the throne following Edward VII's death, she had developed this understanding into something resembling a system. She called collecting my one great hobby. Over her lifetime, she added more than 2,000 paintings, books, photographs, and decorative art objects to the royal collection. One assessment described her as the most attentive custodian of the collection since the 18th century. She was the first consort since that century to use a pre-existing jewel from the royal archives for her coronation crown rather than commissioning something new. She maintained personal inventory documentation of her jewelry. In 1914, she had the Cullinan diamonds, which she designated personal property, not crown property, removed from the imperial scepter and replaced with glass, the arches made detachable. The distinction between what was hers and what belonged to the institution mattered to her precisely. She owned over 200 tiaras. There is a story, widely told, variously verified, about what happened when Queen Mary visited the homes of her aristocratic friends. The account, which appeared in multiple forms and seems to have surfaced in Pope Hennessy's research notes, describes a practice. Queen Mary would arrive, make a circuit of the rooms, remark with genuine enthusiasm upon some object, and the host would eventually feel that social obligation had pointed in one direction only. The object would become a gift. The royal butler's documentation of this habit noted it became jokingly referred to as acquiring objects she admired. The London Review of Books questioned whether the whole thing was simply a rumor. The Telegraph offered an alternative reading, that Queen Mary's encyclopedic knowledge and intense focus, her habit of asking precise questions about unusual objects, may have been misread as a hint when it was really just enthusiasm. Some hosts attested to the experience directly. The ambiguity has never been resolved. What can be said is that Queen Mary was someone for whom the grammar of objects was a primary language. When she noticed something, the noticing was never casual. Her official biographer, James Pope Hennessy, whose 1959 work is still considered the definitive account, described her as a woman of iron self-discipline and a sacerdotal sense of duty. His working notes, later published by Hugo Vickers in 2018 as The Quest for Queen Mary, contained what the official biography had smoothed away, testimony from people who had known her, unfiltered. Daisy Bigg, daughter of George V's private secretary, Lord Stamfordham, told Pope Hennessy that Queen Mary was frightened to death of her own husband. Edward, who became the Duke of Windsor after the abdication, called his mother a moral coward. Her nephew, the Marquis of Cambridge, reportedly said she had no friends. Her technique for overcoming her profound shyness, those who observed her noted, was to focus intensely on other people, to ask pointed questions, to study what they had and where it came from. A shy person's mechanism for connection. Pay very close attention. She wasn't cold in the way that word is usually meant. She was contained. Constrained by training, by a difficult marriage, by the iron requirements of the institution she served. The warmth existed. It moved through different channels. The primary channel was objects. What she gave told you where you stood. 4 women married the sons of George V and Queen Mary between 1923 and 1937. Each relationship had its own temperature. Each wedding produced a gift, or, in one case, didn't. Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon arrived first. She was 22 years old when she accepted Prince Albert, Duke of York, on January 14, 1923. Queen Mary wrote in her diary the following day, "We are all delighted." For a woman who rarely permitted herself uncalculated expression, that was something close to warmth. Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was Scottish, aristocratic without being royal, socially gifted, and constitutionally suited to the work royal life demanded. She understood what she was entering. Queen Mary, who had little patience for women who found royal duty onerous, recognized in Elizabeth someone who had made the same essential calculation she herself had made, that the institution was more important than the individual, and that one simply got on with it. The resonance between them was genuine, whatever constraint Queen Mary placed on expressing it openly. The wedding was April 26, 1923, at Westminster Abbey. From Queen Mary, Elizabeth received a suite of sapphire and diamond jewelry, a fringe necklace, a corsage brooch, 2 smaller brooches, a ring, and a bracelet. The choice of sapphires wasn't random. Elizabeth had chosen a sapphire engagement ring, and the gift matched that preference. Acknowledging a personal preference isn't a neutral act. It says, "I noticed. I paid attention. I confirmed your place here." Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark came to the family 11 years later, when she married Prince George, Duke of Kent, on November 29, 1934. The relationship had deep roots before the wedding. Marina had first visited England as a child in 1910, 3 years old, after Edward VII's death. During that visit, she met her godmother, Queen Mary, who, according to documented accounts, treated Marina and her sisters like her own children. 24 years passed between that childhood visit and the wedding at Westminster Abbey. The first royal wedding ceremony broadcast by wireless, with loudspeakers allowing the crowds outside to hear the service. Queen Mary's view of Marina had been forming for a long time before the ceremony. What Marina received from Queen Mary was the Cambridge sapphire parure, a tiara, a long chain necklace, 2 sapphire and diamond bracelets, 3 sapphire and diamond brooches, and a pair of cluster and drop earrings. The provenance of this parure ran to 1818, to Princess Augusta of Hesse Castle, who had married Prince Adolphus, Duke of Cambridge. The pieces had passed through Queen Mary's maternal line, through her aunt, Grand Duchess Augusta of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, to Queen Mary herself. To give this parure to Marina was to give her documented history stretching back over a century, not just jewelry, lineage, a place inside a story that began before any of the people present at the 1934 wedding had been born. There was more. The court jeweler's documentation confirms Marina wore a diamond brooch presented directly by Queen Mary at the wedding. The sources also document a rectangular diamond brooch with a ruby bow, described as a remarkable wedding gift to her daughter-in-law, the Duchess of Kent, in 1934, and a large sapphire brooch surrounded by a double row of diamonds, which Queen Mary had purchased from a London jeweler in 1934, specifically for this gift. She didn't only draw from inventory. She bought something new, for this woman, for this occasion. Lady Alice Montague Douglas Scott married Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, on November 6, 1935. The circumstances were difficult. Alice's father had died on October 19th, weeks before the scheduled date, and the ceremony was moved from Westminster Abbey to the private chapel at Buckingham Palace. Scaled back, but not abandoned. From Queen Mary, Alice received a diamond and turquoise parure, a tiara with rococo scrolls and sunburst design, a long chain necklace of 26 turquoise and diamond oval clusters, matching earrings, a ring, 2 bow brooches, a corsage brooch with a tassel, a bangle bracelet, and 2 4-row turquoise bead bracelets. The turquoise stones had belonged to Queen Mary's mother, the Duchess of Teck, the same woman whose financial difficulties had shaped Queen Mary's earliest understanding of objects and security. Queen Mary adjusted the tiara before giving it, lowering it to create a different silhouette. Even in gifting, she was adjusting. Alice also received the honeysuckle tiara, made by E. Wolfe & Company on commission from Gerard, adaptable with various stone configurations, including, in one arrangement, the Cullinan 5 diamond. The relationship between Queen Mary and Alice was characterized in the available accounts as one of mutual respect. Alice took royal duties seriously. By Queen Mary's standards, that was a sufficient foundation. Then there is the 4th daughter-in-law. On June 3, 1937, Wallis Simpson married the man who had been Edward VIII, by then the Duke of Windsor, at the Château de Condé in France. No member of the British royal family attended. Wallis had written, "I am terrified of the court." She had reason for the feeling. Queen Mary had refused firmly to meet Mrs. Simpson during the abdication crisis. Queen Mary's position was that Edward had betrayed his royal duties for personal interests. She didn't revise this assessment. No gift came from the British royal family, no card, no ring, no brooch. Nothing from Queen Mary, nothing from anyone wearing a British crown. The absence was complete and deliberate. 4 daughters-in-law, 3 elaborate gift suites, 1 complete silence. That was the record. The instinct is to read this simply: more approval, better gift. But the specific choices Queen Mary made are more precise than that, and the precision is where the meaning lives. The first distinction is between heirlooms and acquisitions. The Cambridge sapphire parure had documented provenance to 1818. The turquoise suite had belonged to Queen Mary's own mother. The fringe tiara, given to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon in August 1936, when she became Queen Consort after her husband's accession following the abdication, had been made in 1919 from 633 brilliants and 271 rose diamonds drawn from a Queen Victoria-era tiara, bracelet, and royal monogram. Gerard's own royal ledger documents the commission precisely. Mounting 633 brilliants and 271 rose diamonds from Your Majesty's own tiara, bracelet, and monogram in gold and silver settings in a Russian pattern tiara with adjustable head frame, allowing for old settings. These weren't presents selected from a jeweler's case. They were objects with histories being placed in the custody of specific women. The timing of the fringe tiara matters. December 1936, the abdication crisis. Edward signs the instrument of abdication. Albert becomes George VI. Elizabeth, who had married into the family as the wife of a second son, who would almost certainly never be king, becomes Queen Consort overnight. She had, the sources confirm, lacked jewels of her own appropriate to that rank. Queen Mary saw the gap and filled it. The gift was practical. It was also a statement. In the immediate aftermath of the institutional crisis that the abdication represented, the crisis Queen Mary had characterized in terms of betrayal, she looked at her daughter-in-law, who was now queen, and pressed a tiara made from Queen Victoria's diamonds into her hands. This is legitimate continuity. This is what the succession should look like. Elizabeth wore the fringe tiara throughout her years as queen consort, lent it to Princess Elizabeth for her 1947 wedding, and again to Princess Anne for her wedding in 1973. Princess Beatrice wore it in 2020. A chain of legitimate royal brides, marked by the same diamonds, generation after generation, each wearing confirmed membership in the line Queen Mary had drawn. The Cambridge sapphires for Marina carry their meaning in the provenance. Documents don't lie about dates. Giving a woman the jewelry of a princess who entered the family in 1818 is a particular kind of statement, especially for Marina, who had grown up in exile after the overthrow of the Greek monarchy when she was 11 years old, moving through the extended European royal network. A princess without a country. The Cambridge sapphires placed her inside something with roots running back over a century. The additional large sapphire brooch, purchased newly from a London jeweler, added a fresh element to an ancient history. The new purchase said something the parure alone couldn't. I thought about what else you might need, and I went out and got it. The turquoise from the Duchess of Teck's collection represents a quieter signal. Queen Mary giving pieces from her own mother's collection to her son's wife suggests something more personal than protocol, a private chain of matriarchal inheritance, acknowledged through the gift but not announced. Now set these three against the June 1937 wedding at Condé. Wallis did eventually accumulate jewelry with royal provenance, a pearl necklace traceable to Queen Mary's collection, and the emerald bracelet Edward fastened around her wrist in the final days before the abdication, in the rooms of Fort Belvedere. Both pieces appeared with provenance notes in the 1987 Sotheby's Geneva auction. The distinction is critical. These pieces reached Wallis through Edward's personal acts, not through any family sanction. One description of the emerald bracelet places it as coming from Queen Mary's Crown Reserve collection. The 1987 auction catalog confirmed the pearl necklace had belonged to Queen Mary, wife of King George V. But the route by which both pieces arrived at Wallis was Edward's, a man who had already removed himself from the family's purpose. Queen Mary authorized neither transfer. A widely circulated description of this jewelry situation frames it precisely. The jewels King Edward VIII gave to Wallis Simpson that weren't his to give. The pieces Wallis possessed with royal connections weren't hers in the way the Cambridge sapphires were Marina's. They were goods extracted from the family system by someone who had forfeited his standing in it. No biographer, not Pope Hennessy, not Anne Edwards in Matriarch, has left behind an explicit statement that Queen Mary consciously calibrated wedding gifts as dynastic signals. That precise attribution of intent does not exist in the documented record. What exists is the pattern: historically significant heirlooms flowing to 3 approved women, nothing flowing to the rejected one, and the weight and personal significance of each gift tracking closely with Queen Mary's documented assessment of each recipient. The inference is reasonable. The direct documentation of intent is absent. That distinction matters, and it's worth maintaining. She owned over 200 tiaras. She wore few of them. The pieces she possessed and declined to display are almost as informative as the pieces she gave away. The Prince Albert Oriental circlet sat unworn. The Adelaide fringe was in her collection and off her head. The Ladies of England tiara was deliberately unused. The diamond bandeau, the tiara now most widely known as the piece Meghan Markle wore for her 2018 wedding to Prince Harry, was in Queen Mary's possession and rarely seen publicly during her lifetime. Each of these was a decision. For a woman who thought in terms of custody, possession without display wasn't neutral storage, it was control. The Surrey fringe tiara was never worn at all. Queen Mary dismantled it in 1914, its diamonds redistributed into other pieces. What had been a tiara she wouldn't put on her head became raw material for things she found more appropriate. Meanwhile, the honeysuckle tiara, made by E. Wolf and Company on commission from Gerard, adaptable with various stone configurations, became, in 1935, the piece she gave to Alice. A tiara given to a daughter-in-law whose relationship was characterized by mutual respect and shared commitment to duty. The Cambridge Emerald story is the fullest illustration of her custody logic at work. The stones had come down through her mother, Princess Mary Adelaide, Duchess of Teck. When Princess Mary Adelaide died in 1897, the emeralds were inherited by Prince Francis of Teck. His will sent them to Nellie, the Countess of Kilmorey. A family heirloom had left the family. Queen Mary was, the sources confirm, horrified at the thought of losing the family heirlooms to someone outside the royal circle. She negotiated with the Countess and bought the stones back for £10,000. She had them worked into jewelry. When Princess Marina came to the family in 1934, the Cambridge sapphire parure formed part of the historic gift suite. The emerald pieces eventually reached Queen Elizabeth II after Queen Mary's death. The stones that had nearly been permanently lost to an outsider traveled a full circuit, through the family, out of it, bought back at cost, redistributed through approved hands, and finally to the reigning monarch. The post-abdication period clarifies what withholding looked like in practice. Edward had given Wallace the emerald bracelet before the abdication, in the final days at Fort Belvedere, before he signed the instrument and left. He had also passed along the pearl necklace with Queen Mary's provenance. These were his personal choices, made after he had already removed himself from the family structure. Queen Mary sanctioned nothing. The 1987 Sotheby's Geneva auction, which raised $50.3 million from the Duchess of Windsor's collection, included lots with provenance traced directly back to George V and Queen Mary. Pieces that, under a different history, might have circulated through approved royal hands for generations, instead sold to anonymous bidders. Then there is the question of what Queen Mary left the Duke of Windsor in her will. One account, noted here as coming from a single source without corroboration, records that he received from her 1953 estate only 3 small boxes and a pair of silver candlesticks. If accurate, the contrast with what the approved daughters-in-law received is stark enough to be its own statement. Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, inherited the kunzite element of the honeysuckle tiara from Queen Mary's estate in 1953. A final installment on a gift Queen Mary had already made at Alice's 1935 wedding, the kunzite component arriving posthumously, as though Queen Mary had arranged her bequests with the same care she had arranged her lifetime gifts. The relationship marked as one of mutual respect was confirmed again, after death, by a transfer that no one had to make. Queen Mary died on March 24, 1953. The coronation of Elizabeth II was scheduled for June 2, 6 weeks later. She had arranged most of what mattered before she died. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara is the clearest example of how she managed the succession of objects. The tiara had been given to her, not by her, at her own wedding in 1893. A committee of women across Britain, organized by Lady Eva Greville, had raised the funds. E. Wolf and Company made it on commission from Gerard. The Royal Ledger entry from Gerard, dated June 26, 1893, records the commission. A diamond band and scroll-pattern tiara surmounted by fine drop pearls. Lady Eva Greville donated a £3,000 surplus from the fund to the widows and children of 350 sailors lost when HMS Victoria sank that same month. Queen Mary wore this tiara for 54 years. She wore it for Edward VII's coronation in 1902. She wore it for official portraits around George V's 1911 accession. In 1914, she returned it to Gerard. The Baroque pearls replaced with diamonds from the dismantled Surrey fringe tiara. The bandeau separated to allow different configurations. It came back reshaped by her preferences, carrying stones from a piece she had decided to dismantle. Then, in November 1947, she gave it to Princess Elizabeth, her granddaughter, as a wedding gift for her marriage to Prince Philip. Popular accounts sometimes claim Queen Mary gave this tiara to Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon at her 1923 wedding. The Royal Collection Trust's own record is unambiguous. RCIN 200192 states, "This tiara was a wedding present from the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland to the Duchess of York, later Queen Mary, in 1893. In November 1947, Queen Mary gave the tiara as a wedding present to her granddaughter, Princess Elizabeth." Gerard's record confirms the 1947 transfer. The claim about 1923 circulates? It's wrong. When Queen Mary gave the tiara to Princess Elizabeth in 1947, she sent it accompanied by the Duchess of Teck's pearl earrings, Queen Mary's diamond stomacher, a pair of pearl earrings from the ladies of Devonshire, Indian diamond bangles from the Bombay Presidency, a diamond bow brooch from the County of Dorset, and a ruby and diamond bracelet from the County of Cornwall. The tiara and its accompanying gifts were displayed at St. James's Palace between November 1947 and March 1948, and seen by over 200,000 visitors. Queen Elizabeth II wore the tiara for her first official portraits as queen, taken by Dorothy Wilding in February 1952. Instantly recognizable, the alternating round and lozenge-shaped diamonds, the fleur-de-lis design, it became the face of the new reign. The image was used on coins, on banknotes, on Commonwealth currency. One design used on Bank of England notes appeared until the Queen's death in September 2022. For 70 years, the face of British monarchy wore Queen Mary's tiara, the one Queen Mary had received at her own wedding and carried through 5 reigns before passing it forward. The tiara passed vertically through the succession, from Queen Mary to her granddaughter who became queen, not to any of the daughters-in-law. The lateral gifts, the fringe tiara to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, the Cambridge sapphires to Marina, the turquoise to Alice, confirmed membership in the family. The vertical gift confirmed something different. This particular woman was the continuation of the institution itself. The fringe tiara's chain extended through time alongside it. Made in 1919 from 633 brilliants and 271 rose diamonds repurposed from Queen Victoria's pieces, given to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon in 1936 when she became queen consort, the tiara was lent to Princess Elizabeth for the 1947 wedding and to Princess Anne for her wedding to Mark Phillips in 1973. Princess Beatrice wore it in 2020. 4 royal brides across more than 8 decades, all from the legitimate line Queen Mary had helped define. Cambridge emerald pieces, after their long circuit. From Princess Mary Adelaide through Prince Francis, through Nellie, the Countess of Kilmorey, bought back for £10,000, worked into jewelry by Queen Mary's design, eventually reached Queen Elizabeth II through the 1953 estate. The stones that had almost permanently left the family ended in the possession of the reigning monarch. The arrangement Queen Mary had designed closed. The 1987 Sotheby's Geneva auction was the ending no one had planned for the other side. The Duchess of Windsor's jewelry collection, amassed through Edward's personal purchases, his diversions of pieces with royal provenance, decades of gifts to the woman he had given up the throne to marry, raised $50.3 million. The catalog traced certain lots' provenance directly to George V and Queen Mary. the pieces scattered to buyers across the room. What might, in an alternative inheritance, have circulated through approved royal hands, ended on an auction floor. Nothing Queen Mary had given to the approved daughters-in-law ended that way. The pieces she had placed with Elizabeth, with Marina, with Alice, remained in family hands, passed to younger women in the legitimate succession, marked occasions and portraits and coronations. The distribution she had constructed in life held, broadly, after her death. Certain women and their descendants kept accumulating. Certain others ended up catalogued at Sotheby's. The version of Queen Mary that has passed into popular memory, icy, emotionally inaccessible, expressing control through objects because she felt nothing worth expressing otherwise, is accurate as a surface impression and insufficient as an explanation. Pope Hennessy's working notes, the ones Vickers published in 2018, show something considerably more complicated. The people who had known Queen Mary most closely described someone whose emotional life was constrained, not absent. Daisy Biggs' testimony that Queen Mary was frightened to death of her husband isn't the portrait of a cold woman. It's the portrait of a frightened one who had learned over decades to channel whatever she felt into forms the institution required and her marriage permitted. The iron self-discipline Pope Hennessy documented wasn't the discipline of someone who felt nothing. It was the discipline of someone who felt and had learned not to show it. The shyness is the key that most accounts leave out. She overcame it, those who observed her said, by paying intense attention, by asking focused questions, by studying what people had and where things came from. The same scrutiny she gave to objects in homes, to their provenance and placement, she gave to people. Her habit of close observation wasn't calculation. It was a shy person's mechanism for connection, turned outward because turning inward was too dangerous. When Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon accepted Prince Albert's proposal, Queen Mary wrote, "We are all delighted," and then, 4 months later, put a suite of sapphires in her hands because she had noticed the sapphire engagement ring. When Elizabeth became Queen Consort overnight in December 1936 and lacked the material symbols of her new rank, Queen Mary noticed and gave her the fringe tiara. The attentiveness was real. The care was real. It simply expressed itself through objects because that was the channel available to it. The gifts to Marina, the Cambridge sapphires with their 1818 provenance, the new sapphire brooch purchased specifically, the diamond brooch for the wedding day, were the gifts of someone who had known Marina since childhood, who had been her godmother, who had made a decades-long assessment of this woman and decided she was worthy of the family's most historically documented jewelry. Something functioned like love in those transfers, expressed in the only vocabulary Queen Mary had fully mastered. Against this reading, the absence for Wallis isn't simply cold, it's precise. Queen Mary had a language for approval. She spoke it for Elizabeth, for Marina, for Alice. She chose not to speak it for Wallis. In that language, refusal is as clear a statement as the most elaborate gift. She died with her collection largely dispersed to the places she had chosen. The tiaras had gone to queens and daughters-in-law she trusted. The historically significant pieces had been placed with the women through whom the family would continue. The Cambridge emeralds had come back from the Countess of Kilmorey at considerable cost, transformed and distributed correctly. The piece she'd carried on her own head for 54 years had gone to the granddaughter who would carry the institution forward. She wasn't sentimental in any ordinary sense. Sentiment, for her, had to pass through inventory to become real. But it did pass through. The brooch, she noticed, the sapphires that matched the ring, the parure with the 1818 documents, the tiara she'd owned since her own wedding before giving it to the woman who would wear it for the next 70 years. These weren't nothing. They were the record of what Queen Mary saw in each woman, expressed in the most permanent medium available to her. With Queen Mary, the gift was never just the gift. It was the message. Subscribe for more stories like this.